This paper is probably the last paper I produced whilst I was doing my PhD, before sadly my supervisor died. This paper is about God being good. And this is a problem that my supervisor had left me with in our final meeting, and I wanted to try and explore it. Because historically it has always been an issue about is God good because there's an objective concept of good against which we measure God, or is God good because God has the power to assign goodness to things? Well, I think that might actually be an unsolvable problem. But what is solvable is the concept that humans can know objectively whether something is good. Whether God can know that, that's an issue for God. But we can actually pretty confidently say that humans cannot assess what is good objectively. We haven't got the capacity to do that. And it's an interesting thing I've noticed in the last few years, that people assume they know what good is. Now, I would have said 30 years ago, the assumption was we couldn't know what good was. That was something beyond our comprehension. Nietzsche has suggested that if God is dead, then these concepts of knowing what good is tend to be moral masts imposed upon us by the dominant parts of society. But today, we seem to have forgotten Nietzsche's critique that if God is dead, all attempts to assign objective value to goodness must go with them. And unfortunately, there seems to be a sort of intolerance, really, I might have to put it, to anybody who might doubt this particular vision of goodness that our culture now has. And it's quite surprising how powerful it is. But really, our intuitions are not a good source of assigning what is good. You have to be as old as I am to realize that 60 years ago, our intuitions about what was good, it was very different to what they are now. Now, I'm not particularly suggesting which was right and which was wrong, or whether some aspects were right in the past and some aspects were wrong in the past, and some are right today and some are wrong today. But what I do know is that our intuitions do change. And it's very clear that the culture has the capacity to rewire our conscience so that we think things are good today, which we didn't used to think were good, and vice versa. Which means I can't assign to human beings the capacity to know objectively what is good. In which case, there's really only one person who has the capacity to even get close to knowing objectively what is good. And that is God, because God knows everything and God does not lie. And so if in special revelations such as the Bible, God tells us what is good, then we as humans should listen very carefully, because we are in no position to be able to say that God is wrong. We just don't have the intellectual capacity to do that, because our intuitions are so dominated by things like our culture. And so our intuitions are not a safe place to go to in determining what is good. And that's, I think, the conclusion I came to, is that if God says he is good, then I think we either believe him or we reject God entirely. But I don't think that's a very wise thing, because we have the evidence of miracles, the evidence of fulfilled prophecy, and the evidence of creation to tell us that God does really exist, and it's the God of Christianity, and it's the God of the Bible. And so our proper response is one of humility, which says, Lord, I don't understand why you call that good, but I will submit to what you say. And it's interesting that God is quite capable of us talking to him about some of the things we're not sure about. He doesn't mind us debating with him. He doesn't mind us, with respect, saying, I'm not sure about this. That's not a problem to God. But it has to be done with a due respect for God and a due fear of God. But it's also a conversation, because ultimately God wants a relationship with us, and he quite likes to hear when we're not too sure about what he's saying. The Psalms are full of that. The psalmist is forever saying to God, I do not understand why this is happening. I don't find this at all acceptable. And Job is a classic example where God has to listen to his best friend Job complaining really, really powerfully about God's behavior. God wants to have a relationship with us, but ultimately we must remember that God is God and he knows what is good because he has access to the knowledge necessary to find that out. And I think that's the safest place for us to be. And in the Bible, God has revealed these things. And I think with humility and in a relationship with God, that is the safest place to be. Human understanding of goodness will always be flawed and be open to manipulation and error. Well, thank you for listening.